It was here for mayhem and murder, and it would get what it wanted in large doses. Oh yes, it bloody would. Tim Meyer, Kill Hill Carnage. Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Devin. And today we're getting up at the crack of dawn and heading to the mess hall when we talk about summer camp horror.
This episode of Books in the Freezer is brought to you by Audible. This podcast wouldn't be possible without audiobooks. So if you want some spooky stories told by some familiar voices, try Stephen King's Pet Sematary, read by Dexter's Michael C. Hall, or The Dead Zone, read by James Franco, or podcast favorite Joe Hill's Nosferatu, read by Kate Mulgrew. For a free audiobook and 30-day trial, go to audibletrial.com/booksinthefreezer. Happy listening. I am so excited to talk about summer camp horror. I feel like I've been pushing for this episode for forever.
That's because you have. Before I was really even a host on the show, we talked about doing a summer camp horror episode.
I know, we would be planning out and I would be like, also when it starts to get warm, I think we should do a summer camp horror episode. And I don't know if I mentioned, but I definitely want to do a summer camp horror episode.
Mm-hmm. This is an idea that's been around longer than me, so it's only a matter of time.
Oh, man. Like, what is your relationship to summer camp in pop culture? Because I felt like growing up, summer camp was like the part of like the American experience, you know?
See, I'm not quite in the same mindset as you because not to feed into the Canadian stereotype, but today we had a semi snowstorm, and so it's not really getting that warmer here yet.
Oh wow!
I still got like a month or so left.
So you're like not mentally ready to do this episode. You're like, I had to shovel my car off today.
Pretty much, yeah. It was snow all over the ground.
That's crazy.
But yeah, summer camp is kind of just a general staple, I guess, in a lot of people's upbringing. For a lot of people, it's the first time they are on their own, quote unquote, on their own, away from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm assuming that would be somewhat what your experiences were growing up.
Yeah, I went with my church like every summer, I think from like 8th grade all the way up to 12th grade. It was just like a 1-week thing with my church, just like going up to like a summer camp with other youth groups in the area. And it was just very much what you think of a summer camp experience, basically.
Yeah, see, I never really did that I can recall, except for one weekend when I was like 12 or 13. Other than that, I've did day camps, I've did sport camps, computer camps, but they were all like at the university, staying in dorms and stuff like that in the middle of town. I never done the go into the woods by the lake and stay in a cabin or a tent or anything. I've camped, but I've never gone to a summer camp in this kind of sense.
That's so cool, though.
Sort of. Somehow.
Do you live in more of like a woodsy area?
Yes.
Okay. Because like we lived like in the suburbs of Southern California. So we were like, look at the forest. That's a deer.
Yeah, no. Behind my home, it's a dense forest. Like there used to be railroad tracks through there, but they were taking it when I was a kid. So yeah, I go out my back door and I'm in the middle of the woods. And if I go out the front door, I can see the bay that leads into the ocean. So like, yeah, I grew up in a very rural center. There was roughly, I think, 3,500 people in my community growing up.
Oh man, I feel like growing up too, there was a lot of summer camp just in like the regular pop culture that I consumed. Like one of my favorite movies growing up was The Parent Trap, and I will admit that to this day, if it is on streaming, I will stop whatever I am doing and watch it. And yes, the Lindsay Lohan Parent Trap.
Okay. I was going to say, there is two, isn't there?
Yeah, I only recognize the 1999 one, or 1998.
Actually, there's 3.
What?
because It Takes Two. It Takes Two with Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen is basically The Parent Trap.
I love that movie so much too.
Am I wrong?
Christy Alley and Steve Guttenberg. I guess technically, except in this case, one of them is an orphan.
Yeah, details. It's a Prince and a Pauper story.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Oh, also growing up, there was Bug Juice on Disney Channel, which I firmly believe was my generation's introduction to reality television.
So, Bug Juice was intentionally written that way? I thought you meant Beetlejuice when you said this.
No, this was... it's Bug...
I've never heard of Bug Juice before.
Wow. Yeah, so it was a reality show that followed like these kids at summer camp, and it was, edited, like a reality show. Like you follow different kids and their bunks and their dramas and their experiences. Well, there was also Salute Your Shorts, which like I remember watching, but it was, I feel like, older for me at the time, and I don't remember too much of it. Like I was really young when that was on. Shoot, was it Disney Channel or Nickelodeon? I don't even remember.
The only thing I could think of that I had that's comparable to this, and if there's other Canadian listeners that might be able to back me up with this, is a show called Camp Caribou. And that was a sketch comedy show with these strange hosts, and it takes place at a summer camp called Camp Caribou. I just watched the intro to that again right before we recorded this, and it's like a fever dream to me right now. But I remember loving that as a kid.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it was everywhere. And then I think later, like when I was more college age, I discovered like the movie Wet Hot American Summer, and then like that recently had, a show and a movie.
Okay, I was gonna say that's the one that recently got the Netflix series, was it? Okay, I never did get to watch that, but I was supposed to.
It's so funny because Wet Hot American Summer takes place on like the last day of camp, and then they recently did. Yeah, I think it was the series. And the series, they're obviously much older, but it's supposed to be a prequel. So it's just like so ridiculous.
Is it at least self-aware?
Yes. Oh, it is very self-aware.
Okay. Just... Yeah, I've heard good things about it.
Oh, man. It's funny because it's all these people before they got big. So it's like Paul Rudd and Amy Poehler and Bradley Cooper. But it was like before they really were the stars they are now. In this like little indie comedy movie.
Nice.
Oh man. But anyway, talking about summer camp in horror, why do you think it works so well?
Okay, well, I mean, it's like I alluded to earlier, the summer camp, just as a concept, as an ideal, is usually children getting out away from their parents or guardians, able to get their first taste of independence. But at the same time, looking at it from a horror perspective, that also releases them from the protection of said guardians and parental figures. So they're independent, and that's great. But then they also realize they need to take care of themselves, so they're more vulnerable in that sense. That's something that can be exploited pretty easily with the horror genre.
I definitely think so. Yeah, it answers that, like, what are we going to do with the parents?
Pretty much, yeah. It's also usually, even if it's a camp that they've returned to before, like more unfamiliar, you kind of get out of the safe space kind of feeling, like of your home, of your room, of whatever. You're in the wilderness now. That's no longer your domain. So again, that plays more into the fact that they will be more vulnerable, more susceptible to fear of the unknown, things of that nature. So it really blends itself well to horror in that sense.
I think so, and I think also when you're a camper in that environment, even though it's different and it's out of your comfort zone, like if you know me at all, I am not an outdoorsy person in the least. No one would ever describe me that way. But when you're there, there's something about the environment that just is wholesome and is considered safe. Like I remember just like walking back to my cabin at night in like the dark in this wooded area and really not thinking anything of it because it's like, it's camp. Like what's going to happen?
Well, yeah. No. That's kind of where I was going with it, is the fact that the kids, and again, it's not always kids, but I'm just going to use it as a catch-all term here. The counselors and the participants in these summer camps, they go to these foreign and wild kind of areas under the guise of in complete control, because the counselors are there for their safety. So the kids don't actually worry. They're not afraid. They're there for fun. They're there for good times. When the horror kicks in, dial gets turned up, everything goes to hell. It becomes so much more desperate, because once that facade of the safety net is gone and they're left with just the wilderness and things out of their control, then that's when the tension, can really ramp up fairly easily using this particular kind of setting.
Definitely. And on top of that, it's usually secluded. Like, that's usually kind of the point, is to go somewhere to get away from everything. So,
oh, for sure. Oh, definitely. A lot of these, it's a good excuse to not have cell phones. It's a good excuse to not have technology, because these are meant to be, learning to live off the land and roughing it and stuff like this. So yeah, it's a great way to isolate the potential victims from safety.
I think back to like the first point about it being a place that younger kids or like teens can kind of get away from their parents and use this as a place to explore their independence, which, as we said, applies to both campers and counselors. So when you have that, I think it also results in kids acting obnoxious and pushing boundaries and testing limits. I feel like there's a lot of that when you look at summer camp horror.
Wait, what do you mean?
Like experimenting.
Oh, yeah.
Certain behaviors.
Yeah, when you take children or teens or dependents away from their parents or people that is in charge of them the other 50 weeks of the year, or however long the camp would be, that's when you get more of a heightened sense of who they are. There's less inhibitions, less boundaries. So you get to see the best of them, and the worst of them get amplified. Mm-hmm. So yeah, kids acting out, kids experimenting with certain things, giving in to things that they would not be able to do so if they were at home.
Yes, I feel like there's a lot more peer pressure. I think becomes more consolidated. And I don't know about you, but basically every book that I read for the episode, I would say is a slasher story.
Yes, that's a very, very common thing. If you look up, just try and find summer camp horror, it'll generally bring you to a bunch of the top 10 best slasher novels and stuff like this. But there are so many other things you can do with that. One of mine is actually not a slasher.
Ooh, I'm excited. Sorry, that was like a very big overreaction.
I'm not sure if it's going to be a Stephanie book, but it's definitely not a slasher. One of mine. The other one actually, it is, but again, it's this week I've tried to find books that kind of subvert the trope a little bit, because generally I think as I approach books in the freezer as a way to try and, inform and educate on certain subgenres, I sometimes try to go with derivative works to get people, their introduction to it. But with summer camp horror, people are so aware of this kind of thing that, as you said, the mind immediately goes to slasher. They think Friday the 13th, they think Sleepaway Camp, they think kids in the woods being hunted by this person that wants to kill them, kind of thing. So I try to veer at least a little bit away from that in my picks this week, but it is certainly the most prominent story that I can tell.
2 out of 3 of my books kind of deal with a massacre that took place at the camp, and so the lore kind of surrounding the camp, like, ooh, 20 years ago something happened here. And I would say, like, one of my books, we start off in summer camp.
Yeah. So, well, that's the main
like
thing.
A little different.
A lot of summer camp horror is slasher, and the differentiation between them, and usually the author's imprint on the story, what separates it from the others, is the method of which the antagonist, delivers his pain, or the origin of said antagonist. Those are the two things that kind of really give this kind of story its identity. So, like, you have your Jason Voorhees, the kid that drowned in the lake and is coming back for revenge after counselors killed his mother. You have Sleepaway Camp, which I don't care how old this story is. I do not want to spoil the ending of Sleepaway Camp, because it's one of the best swerve endings in all of cinema.
No, you can't.
But you see the motivations behind the killers, the origin stories behind why they do what they do or how they do what they do. That's what makes each story unique.
I do love Sleepaway Camp.
I was not sold on Sleepaway Camp just as a premise, but like I said, in terms of the antagonist, the story of the antagonist can really sell this kind of story. And dear God, this, yes, the series maybe not so much, but at least the original Sleepaway Camp is to me a must see as a horror
I
film.
mean, it's a little campy and everyone overacts in it, but that's definitely the charm.
Oh my God, it's glorious overacting though.
No, that wouldn't do. That wouldn't do at all. No, that's like definitely what makes it good. And it didn't mention one of my favorite summer camp storylines is Wednesday's storyline at Adam's Family Values. Icon.
See,
You better not be getting ready to throw any Wednesday hate on here because I will not stand for this.
I'm more of a Friday kind of person, just saying.
Like Rebecca Black's Friday?
Oh no, that's horror. Okay, I'm scared now.
Like Friday the 13th. Like, do you like Jason more than Friday? Like, you like Fridays more than Nightmare?
That's not fair. Don't ask me that. I do really love Jason Voorhees. I love his story. I love him as a character. I love the evolution of his character. Coming from, being the kid in the lake, being just a guy living in the woods, and then enacting his revenge, and then legitimately coming back from the dead and being the, unstoppable beast that we know him as now. The evolution of Jason is so much more coherent to me than, say, a Michael Myers. Or honestly, even a Freddy Krueger. Like, Freddy's lore is so odd and contradictory. And Jason, it's so well done. I love Jason. But I'm sorry, as much as I adore Kane Hodder, nobody in horror is going to compete with Robert Englund with playing Freddy Krueger. Even if the lore is contradictory, I cannot supplant Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger, as like one of if not the greatest horror monsters out there, with Jason being very close to that. How many of these series have you seen, Steph?
Of Friday the 13th?
Yeah.
I've watched 1, 2, 3, 4, and then Manhattan, Jason X,
Oh God,
and
no.
Freddy versus Jason.
Oh, why do you bring up Jason X again?
I had to.
Why do I ask these questions?
You asked how many in the series I had watched, so I figured that was
fair.
under the umbrella of Jason Voorhees movies.
That was totally on me. I understand. I think with the Friday series, as repetitive as it was getting, I think when they got away from actually doing summer camp, it got a little more far-fetched. Like in 5,
I like Manhattan.
Manhattan was okay, but it was on a boat. So it was still, you got that claustrophobic kind of isolated kind of feel. So it was not a camp, but it still kind of went to the same plot device. If you look at part 5 is Tommy Jarvis being brought back to a halfway home that just happens to be close to Crystal Lake. And that's where the killings are happening. Before that, it's a bunch of college kids renting. Part 4 is with a bunch of college kids renting a home next to the Tommy Jarvis house with his family.
Wait, is that the Crispin Glover one?
No, that's sorry, that's Crispin Glover. Yes, because
I watched them. I marathoned them. I think 2 years ago. So a lot of them run together for me.
Yeah.
Other than the first one. The first one is the only one I can clearly remember. I would say 2, 3, 4 for me.
4, 5, and 6 is easy for me to remember because of Tommy Jarvis. Part 4 is where Tommy comes in, Corey Feldman, where he actually kills Jason Voorhees. Then part 5 is part 5. The less said about that, the better. Oh God, it's so horrible. And then part 6 is when Tommy Jarvis resurrects Jason and brings him to being this monstrous zombie. But I mean, like, okay, so we talk a lot about the antagonists, but sometimes it's actually just the locale itself. Like the camp itself has its own history, its own foreboding presence. And I find in a lot of summer camp horror, even when it is a slasher, the camp itself plays as important a character as anyone else in the story.
Oh, definitely. If one could say, it's almost like the camp is a character.
And this is kind of what I'm referring to, yes.
I know you're trying to say it without saying it.
Pretty much.
Oh, man. So do we want to talk about some books?
Sure. Sounds like a swell idea.
What is this, the 1950s? Golly gee, I'll get right on it.
Are you really dissing me for the word swell?
Yes.
Wow.
I feel like I'm really antagonistic this episode.
Steph is the Voorhees.
So the first book I want to talk about is Kill River by Cameron Rubik. I think this has been mentioned in a previous episode. I think it was one of Rachel's picks, but I thought it was too perfect and just had to be mentioned again in this episode. So this follows a girl named Cindy. She's about 13 and her parents are forcing her to go to this summer camp. And she's not happy about it because she's on the older end of it. Like, it's definitely more for like elementary aged kids. And even though the camp like technically goes up to like the 13-14-year-old range, you know, she's out of place and does not want to be there. So she makes friends with a few other kids her age who are feeling similarly. And they decide one night to sneak out and steal one of the canoes and get out of there. They row down the river and they end up in an abandoned water park, which sounds very fun. But of course, since this is a slasher story, we know that there has to be a dark side to this. And there is a foreboding presence at this park. And Cameron Rubik does a great job of making this setting that should be like this awesome thing really feel very creepy. And not just because there is a killer after them and the kids start disappearing one by one. Oh, and I know last week we talked about Forgotten Island by David Sodergren, where I said, like, there's all these characters and you hate them so much that you want them to die. I would say this is the opposite, where you're like, no, leave him alone, no. Where you just really become endeared to these kids. And it might be because they're like 13. So you're like, no, you're like a little too young. Like if you were 15, I don't know how I would feel. But at 13, like, I care too much for you, baby. So I would say, like, yeah, this was emotionally, like, I think it does a great job of really getting these characters that you care about. And over the course of this book, you've seen them, like, go on this adventure and, like, all of this. And you do find yourself getting attached to them. I do have the sequel, which actually Rachel and I are going to buddy read sometime this week. And I'm really excited to revisit this story. So I would say this is, as far as temperature rating, I would say fridge. There's some pretty good kills and Cindy is a great protagonist. You're just very emotionally invested in the story. And I would say it gave me everything I wanted out of a slasher story. So that is Kill River by Cameron Rubik.
And I am going to pick one that also has a tie to Rachel because this is an author that I found because of Rachel talking about him on the podcast. And this one, why did I say and? I don't know. We're going to be talking about The Con Season by Adam Caesar. This one is the pick of mine that is a pseudo-slasher story. But it's not a traditional summer camp. What it is, it follows this scream queen, the Jamie Lee Curtis, if you will, kind of actress named Clarissa Lee, and she has fallen on some bad financial times when this opportunity arises from this mysterious person for her to come to a convention that's happening called Blood Camp Con. It's a small con, brand new, and it's not just a convention, but like a complete, fully immersed recreation of like a summer camp, kind of like a let's live a Friday the 13th experience kind of convention. So the pays really well. She agrees to it. Then she sets off for this con, only to find out that there are nefarious intentions behind all of this, as one can guess. That maybe the fully immersive part of this may be a little too immersive. Quickly, Clarissa has to become the final girl that she has played so many times in the films, in a real life situation. I really like this. It's, to me, it kind of felt, and this may be a vague kind of analysis, but to me it felt like a Scream meets Friday the 13th.
Okay.
Like, it's a good, solid Friday the 13th, like, slasher kind of story. However, it's really aware of the horror genre because it involves a number of actors that are horror actors. And they use like jargon of the genre. They make a lot of references. They name drop Kane Hodder. They like it. It's this to me in some part feels like Adam flexing his I know a lot of horror kind of muscle in it, but it fits really well because these are people that are so obsessed with horror as a genre that they are coming together, and then this whole slasher experience is happening. They're not completely unlikable characters, but they are certainly flawed. And yeah, it's just a really solid example of the kind of horror that Caesar is capable of writing. This is the second book I've read by him, and so far he has not disappointed yet. So I would totally recommend this one. As far as temperature rating, there are chapters from the perspective of the antagonist, like setting things up. So there's not a lot of suspense in what's happening, at least early on. So I would probably say this is a chilled room temperature, maybe. But it's definitely a good, solid piece to get your feet wet for summer camp horror.
That sounds so fun. I heard on the Shockwaves podcast, one of them was reading this book a while ago. I'm kind of going through the back catalog, and when they were talking about it, I'm like, that sounds like such a fun book. And the way you described it right now definitely makes me want to read it.
When I say Scream, it's because of the whole, it's somewhat self-aware and meta to horror tropes and stuff, and they're called out for being horror tropes as well. But yeah, it's solid. So yeah, that was The Con Season by Adam Caesar.
Well, my next pick is Kill Hill Carnage by Tim Meyer. So at St. Christopher's Camp, and in the 90s, there was a massacre there, and we do keep revisiting that throughout the story. But in present day, Frank Harmon is assigned with quote unquote tying up the loose ends concerning what happened then. And that's actually how the present day storyline opens up, is him like beating the crap out of somebody and making sure they don't talk permanently, which was totally my bag. But the person is like, there's so much you don't know, like, what are they paying you? Like there's a lot of stuff that you need to know. Like, they're not being fully honest with you. And he's like, I don't care. I just want my paycheck. This is just the job I have. I don't care what you have to say. And we find out that maybe he should have listened to that guy. There is a lot going on. So around this same time, so we're following the Frank storyline. And then we have, of course, a group of young people who decide to go on a camping trip to get their mind off of things. And of course, for some reason, they decide that they want to check out this St. Christopher site where this massacre happened years ago, of course, as you do. Throughout the story, we get little vignettes of what happened at the camp. And those were a lot of fun because those are just, slasher kill scenes that are just set up and you know how they're going to end. And I was anyway, like very excited. I'm like, oh, something's going to happen. And I just really enjoyed whenever we got to revisit that. I also just really liked the two storylines. Like there wasn't a storyline that I was like, ugh, this again. But I loved how they all came together. And one thing I really, really liked was the antagonist. I am not going to say really anything about it because I think you just need to read it and find out for yourself. But I thought it was very cool and very inventive and different for what you usually get in slasher stories. I would put this in the fridge. Like I said, a lot of bloody kills, especially when we go back to what happened at the summer camp. Like, it's not, there's no like holding back. Like, they're violent and brutal kills. With, like I said, built-in tension. Like when the chapters start, like when we go back to the camp, you know how this chapter is going to end, and you know it's not going to end well. So those were probably my favorite. And for those scenes alone, I would put it in the fridge. Although in present day, we definitely do get some kills for sure. So that is Kill Hill Carnage by Tim Meyer.
All right, so that's going to bring me to my second pick. My second pick is the one I hinted at earlier. That is not a slasher story.
I'm waiting. Yeah.
Are you excited?
Now, yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. So, my second pick is The Wild Ones by Jack Hunt. This is the story of Scotty amongst a whole ensemble cast of characters. And Scotty's summer is ruined because his parents want to go on a cruise. So they send him to survival camp. He doesn't want to go, but he is unable to negotiate out of going. And it's not just any survival camp. It is zombie survival camp. I'm starting to lose her. So yeah, basically that's what this is. This kid, well, he's a teenager. He ends up being coerced into going to this camp by his parents. It's a camp that his brother has gone to for many years. And it is a survival camp that is marketed as a zombie survival camp in terms of, general survival tactics. However, very, very quickly into the story, after you get a few chapters of legitimately good survival things, like teaching them how to know which way is north by the position of the sun by using like a bunch of sticks and like over a period of time seeing which way it's moving. Stuff like this, really informative stuff. After a few chapters of that while he's at camp, and this is also told in the first person, and he is very visibly irritated by being here in the first place. Wouldn't you know it, but there happens to be an outbreak, and then the tools of which they've been learning all of a sudden become very vital to their survival. And then you get to see characters who, were very strong and authoritative, how they react when they are actually faced with the zombie outbreak. It's not extremely gory, but there's some pretty decent examples of viscera and the like. And yeah, like as with any other zombie novel, like what this actually becomes, it's about the characters themselves and how they are coping with what's happening. And I find that's what I enjoyed about this novel, is that, like I said, it's the juxtaposition between, all right, you have the people that are in charge teaching these kids these survival tactics, and then when the actual outbreak happens, who becomes the leaders, who becomes the followers, who keeps calm, who loses their minds, and so on and so forth. With this one, the setting is pretty, again, you get the isolation. I would probably say this one is similar to the Con season in that it's a cold-ish room temperature book, or maybe a warm fridge book. I totally think you may enjoy this whether you like zombie fiction or not, because of the dynamics with the characters. Because I know how much you love interesting character dynamics. So the characters, for their flaws, for their faults, are believable characters. So yeah, it was a solid read.
That sounds like it could be fun. It reminds me of the camp that when we had the horror pod class guys on was a little more of like zombie pop culture stuff, but it definitely reminded me of that when you were talking about it.
Yeah, that did kind of come to mind as I was even reading this. Yeah, that was The Wild Ones by Jack Hunt.
Nice. This brings me to my final pick, which is Under the Blade by Matt Serafini. So this follows a final girl named Melanie Holden. She was the only one who escaped from a camp massacre perpetrated by Cyrus Holt 25 years ago. And that's actually how the book opens up, is with her being the last one alive at this camp and being hunted by Cyrus Holt. So it has a really great opening right away. But in the present, her teaching career has bottomed out. So she decides to spend the summer in Forest Grove, the town where the massacre happened, in an attempt to write a memoir about the events that happened. And so in the present day, we follow her staying at like a bed and breakfast and kind of coming into this town where this traumatic thing happened to her, and her really not getting a warm welcome from the people in the town because she's, associated with the thing that, kind of gave him some bad press. But weirdly, the town of Forest Grove went full like footloose, and they have like strict morality laws since the event, with the thinking that if they could curb teens engaging in like risky behavior, they could prevent something like this from happening again. There's like a small plot line where there's a woman who like grew up there and now she's back because her husband got a job on the police force, and like she's trying to overturn these things. And everyone keeps saying that Cyrus Holt is dead and all of this is in the past, but like Melanie has a hard time believing this, and like, there's something about it that doesn't seem right, and she's not fully convinced that he's really gone. And I would say she even goes as far as to think that there's people in the town that know more about this than they're letting on. So I really liked this. I would say this is a little bit more of a character study and kind of getting more into the darkness in this small town. Someone on Goodreads described it as Friday the 13th meets Sharp Objects, which I thought was really good because that's about someone, going back to a small town where they had a traumatic thing happen, and kind of their relationship to the town and their relationship to this trauma and the town's possible part in all of this. I would say it takes a great turn that I thought was a little unexpected. And I really enjoyed it. As far as temperature ratings, I would say like there's different parts. Like I would say it opens up at freezer, but in the middle, there's a big chunk of the book of like Melanie kind of moving into this town and kind of having a lot of awkward interactions, but I would say at the end we definitely get back into fridge territory, and into a good old slasher story. So that is Under the Blade by Matt Serafini.
Friday the 13th meets Sharp Objects. Is there any wonder why you're recommending this book?
I saw it and I'm like, that is why I liked it. You're absolutely right.
Oh, that sounds good.
All right, you want to talk about should we talk about our chilling obsessions?
We totally should.
So my chilling obsession is one of the Into the Dark movies. And if you don't know, Into the Dark is a thing that Blumhouse is doing with Hulu, where every month they release a horror film. They're about 90 minutes long. And since they're every month, they usually are related to the holiday that is that month. So their first one was dropped on October, which was, of course, like a Halloween one, November, Thanksgiving. You get the idea. I'm still kind of catching up on some of them, but I watched the one that came out for May, which was related to Mother's Day, and that was All That We Destroy. I really enjoyed it. This is a evil child story, so if that's a subgenre that you are into, and I am, I think you'll like it. So this, I heard, was kind of they talked about it on Shockwaves, and I think the director said she was kind of going for like Norman Bates and like almost We Need to Talk About Kevin. I would say going into this, it has the feel of a Black Mirror episode because it's in the near future and we are dealing with a technology that we have and kind of the abuse of that technology for like a dark reason. And so in this story, we have a geneticist who keeps cloning her son's first kill in the hopes that it keeps him satiated and he does not want to go and kill more women. So that I feel like is already saying a lot, and I do not want to say like more than that. But oh man, like like the poster, I wanted to say like the thumbnail, like the movie poster is like a woman coming out of this black goo, and this is how like the clones are, I don't want to say like born, but how they're activated, I guess. I don't know the terminology. But when she gets like a new clone, it's like the imagery of them like coming out of this black goo, and it is so sinister and dark, and I don't know. I really enjoyed it. So I would say if you have Hulu and if you like stories about evil children and you are a fan of Black Mirror, like if those three things apply to you, I would definitely check it out. So that is All That We Destroy.
This is the second one that's been a chilling obsession, right? Because I recall you talking about, was it a Christmas one or was it the Halloween one?
It was the Halloween one, and that was one I didn't like.
Oh, that was a lukewarm letdown,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
that was a lukewarm letdown. They have been very hit or miss. So this is one that I enjoyed. I would say like this one and the Thanksgiving one. Yeah, I'm thinking I might, like when I'm all done, do like a blog post on the website ranking them and talking about them. Yeah.
Do it. Totally. I want to see that.
So yeah, that'll be coming out in September when they're all out. All right. How about you?
Mine is once again trying to stay on brand. And I'm glad I thought about this because this is another film very similar to The Rise of Leslie Vernon in that it's got a massive cult following and the people that know it love it. There's a lot of horror fans that have probably never heard of it. It is a film called Never Hike Alone. This is the story of a hiker. Actually, I'm just going to read it from IMDb for the synopsis because it's pretty self-explanatory. A hiker's survival skills are put to the test when he stumbles upon the remains of an old abandoned camp and discovers its long, dark secrets. That sounds fairly ominous by itself. That is, a regular slasher summer camp kind of story. But what that synopsis doesn't tell you is that camp is Crystal Lake. This is a fan-made pseudo-sequel to the Friday the 13th series. It even has a cameo from Tom Matthews, who played Tommy Jarvis in Part 6. It's really well done, doesn't look like a fan film kind of feature that captures the essence of the Friday the 13th series so well. And very, very, very true to the spirit of the original Friday the 13th, which was done on a shoestring budget and made a crap ton of money. Never Hike Alone, again, it is fan made, so it's a very low budget, very low cast kind of film, but it's so solid. Like you would swear this was actual canon and it was part of it. You could see the love they have for the series by watching this film. There's not much plot really to get into other than, again, this is basically a hiker that stumbles upon Crystal Lake and hilarity ensues from there. If you are even a casual fan of Friday the 13th, even a passing fan, this is one you have no excuse not to check out, and I think you really should. You can actually find this on YouTube for free, so it's very easy to find, very accessible, and like I said, if Friday the 13th is your thing, then this is something you need to treat yourself to.
Right on.
So that was Never Hike Alone.
All right, so let's get down to some housekeeping, some book club updates.
Yeah, we just finished reading The Family Plot by Cherry Priest. That was a Steph pick. That live show was this past Sunday, which means it's time for us to look ahead to June.
So what's your pick for this month, Devin?
June, I get to pick. I am going to go with an author whom I've read only one title before, and I found it very lukewarm. But he's been recommended to me so often that I'm dying to give him another chance at this, and figured if I'm going to try it, you guys might as well try it. So my pick is No One Gets Out Alive by Adam Neville.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Adam Neville, Steph?
I've read short stories of his in anthologies and really liked them. I know Rachel's recommended The Ritual on a survival horror episode. And I know you read, was it House of Small Shadows?
House of Small Shadows, yeah. That was, again, I like that one. It was good. It's a lot of dolls, a lot of interesting psychological things going on, somewhat immortality. It was an odd offering, but No One Gets Out Alive came in afterwards, and it's got general praises for those interested in the plot. No One Gets Out Alive. Let's read this blurb for you guys. Darkness lives within. Cash-strapped, working for agencies, and living in shared accommodation, Stephanie Booth feels she can fall no further.
Is it really about a Stephanie?
It's about a
I
Stephanie.
get like weirdly very excited. It's why I love Lady Gaga.
Oh, God.
Go on. I'm sorry.
So when she takes a new room at the right price, she believes her luck has finally turned. But 82 Edgware Road is not what it appears to be. It's not only the eerie atmosphere of the vast, neglected house, or the disturbing attitude of her new landlord, Knacker McGuire, that makes her uneasy. It's the whispers behind the fireplace, the scratching beneath floors, the footsteps in the dark, and the young women weeping in neighboring rooms. And when Knacker's cousin, Fergal, arrives, the danger goes vertical. But this is merely a beginning, a gateway to horrors beyond Stephanie's worst nightmares. And in a house where no one listens to the screams, will she ever get out alive?
Ooh.
It does seem to be a little like Walker's, which you've already read, family plot as well. So it's once again very, very house centric. It's something sinister going on behind the scenes. Neville was always really good at setting an atmosphere. In House of Small Shadows, the atmosphere he sets down was just overwhelming at times. He's really good at painting a picture. He's really good at setting the tension to the right level. I believe I believe I had some issues with like his dialogue and maybe a little bit of his pacing, but this one is a more recent book, so I'm hoping maybe we'll see a little bit better in this one. But either way, the premise seems intriguing, and cannot wait to start this book.
Nice. So I think this one's been out, long enough that it should be like fairly accessible. I think you said there's an audiobook.
There is an audiobook, and there you can get it in the Kindle store. It's not in Kindle Unlimited, but it is up on Kindle for regular price of a Kindle book.
Actually, I think my library has this book.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if it wasn't in libraries.
Yeah.
This is the Adam Neville book that's always actually on the shelf at Indigo when I go there. So like I said, I'm assuming it is fairly accessible.
Mm-hmm. So we hope you'll all join us next month. I will get on the Goodreads group and break it up by chapters so people can add their thoughts when they finish a certain chapter. And I love reading those. I read all of the comments when you post. I get notifications and I like immediately go and see what everyone thought. But yeah, so definitely check out the Goodreads group. That's where all of the discussion is going to be happening. And then at the end of the month, I think probably the last Sunday of the month, we do a YouTube live show for $3 and up Patreon supporters.
Yes. So it's a good time. We get together and we have a live chat that we can all just basically sit around and discuss the book in its entirety, completely spoilery, no holds barred, what we like, what we didn't like, and arguing with what was good and what was bad.
So definitely join us next month for the Books in the Freezer book club. And if you post about it on Twitter or Instagram, definitely use hashtag BITF book club. Books in the Freezer is a bi-weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at BooksFreezerPod or on Instagram at Books in the Freezer or on Facebook at facebook.com/booksinthefreezer. You can send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. Show notes for this episode and all previous episodes are at booksinthefreezer.com. I'm Stephanie. You can find me on Twitter at lady_Ganya. That's LADY_GAGNON, or on Instagram at That's What She Read, and that's with 2 A's, and YouTube as just That's What She Read, spelled the normal way.
And I'm Devin. You can find me on Twitter at InsomniReads, and also over on Twitch streaming horror game at Indie Insomniac.
Join us next time for Books in the Freezer.